Welcome to another interview with a circular thought leader. My name is Carsten, and today I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Nick Udall. I've known Nick for many years, since my time at the World Economic Forum, where he and I worked side by side at one of the global agenda councils, namely the one on the new models of leadership. Nick is the co-founder and CEO of Nowhere, a living experiment in consciousness, creativity, and commerciality. Nick and his core team of creative catalysts work with organizations around the world to help them develop innovation and breakthrough strategies. And throughout the many years that I've known Nick and have followed his work, I must say that he and his work have never ceased to amaze me, which is why I'm not only happy, but I'm proud, Nick, that you are joining me today.
Thank you, Carsten. Looking forward to sharing some thoughts together.
Great. So, as just mentioned, you have worked with countless companies and top executives from around the world. Tell our viewers, to what extent has the notion of consciousness actually entered the realm of business?
Well, it's interesting. For 20 years now, we haven't shied away from using the word concept of consciousness with our clients and partners. So we don't particularly talk about behavior, we talk about consciousness. And I think we play with the word consciousness and the practice of consciousness in three ways with our clients that makes it real for them. One is around culture. For me, that's a collective experience of consciousness. Is there a hum, a vibe, a resonance in that culture, which you can feel when you walk in the door? And this is often around, is there a core purpose, a sense of belonging, and is it driven? And you can feel that literally as you walk in the door, and how you tune that energetic state of a collective. Secondly, we work with consciousness very clearly in strategy work, because strategy is no longer about just strategic planning or setting targets. It's about how you move elegantly through time and space. And to do that, you have to tap into the collective consciousness of leaders to find the patterns that unlock the movement. And for us, collective consciousness is a higher state of consciousness for a large group of leaders. And very practically, innovation is a critical area where you have to shift consciousness, where you're teaching leaders and groups, often of diverse people, how to hold tension, how to hold difference, how to navigate the unknown, which is a state of consciousness where you don't get triggered, where emotion doesn't take you over in the wrong way. And for me, these are very practical areas where we've been bringing consciousness into business, very quickly delivering different types of results and impact.
Speaking about impact, to what extent can a higher level of consciousness actually impact or benefit the individual or the organization as a whole?
So I'm really always feel a privilege of working at the level we work at on the biggest complex issues in companies. I pinch myself most days. But actually, the thing that I think we've stumbled across around this, what makes the biggest difference for leaders around shifting consciousness, is actually the humble meeting. 95% of leaders spend their time, or 95% of their time in meetings, preparing for meetings or having meetings about meetings. It is the only stage upon which leaders perform their craft. They are not leading without other people in a room or virtually connected to. It is the stage of leadership. And yet, most meeting cultures, the stage of leadership are ineffective. And I see this in every culture we meet, every type of organization, every scale, every industry, that the biggest unmet challenge is the meeting and meeting cultures. And for me, a meeting reflects the level of consciousness of the leader as well as of the system. So the biggest, most profound way of bringing consciousness and its impact into business is to help transform the way organizations meet. It is a huge need. And it's how leaders learn how to hold space instead of take it up with ego and agenda. How to tune into the moment, because meetings unlock in moments. And how to actually realize there's a completely different way of meeting that is more conscious. It plays with time and space differently. So for me, you've got all this complex stuff around consciousness and leadership and strategy and culture. But if we could just shift the consciousness of leaders to transform the way we meet, the world's a different place.
What I think I'm hearing you say is that there's also a possible link, maybe a very real link, between higher levels of consciousness and business or people sustainability. Is that true?
So it depends what you mean about sustainability. So I'm on the advisory board of Sustainable Brands, which is passionate, works with all the big corporates around the world, how to move into sustainability around obviously financial, environmental, social. There's obviously this big movement around the B Corp at the moment, putting purpose at the heart of business, making it a commitment in your legal articles. And I think that, it's a no-brainer. We've got to move to a much more sustainable world, a sustainable business, a more social sense of business and its contribution. I couldn't be more excited. I think these are the drivers of innovation rather than a threat to, the status quo. But I think the challenge at the level of consciousness in this area is we're trying to step over this threshold and be more innovative, more sustainable, but we're hitting up against the limitations of our culture. So actually, we've got unsustainable cultures trying to meet a sustainability challenge. So I think the cultures are hitting this ceiling, and I think it's a consciousness ceiling where, in one sense, doing more of the same but a little bit better is no longer good enough. You have to innovate and leap. And secondly, thinking you can just work harder and longer hours, which you can't, because everyone's already working every hour of the day, 24 hours because of the time zones. You have to shift the way in which you think, meet, and relate to be able to break through this ceiling. And it's also a movement away from sustainability, not just more innovation and shifting the culture to be more innovative, but it's also a mindset away from problem solving, which is moving away from something you don't want, the problem, which is driven by a narrative of fear and is often lazy leadership, to actually creating a movement towards something, being creative, visionary. It's harder, but it's about inspiring a movement, evoking a movement in other human beings, calling them forward, which is harder to do, but we still see our world being polarized, and most leaders are moving towards fear, particularly politicians. And you can see it in CEOs that are very stuck. And we now need to shift away from the problem solvers to the creatives. And this is the biggest need of our time, and is the only way we get to sustainable business.
Is there an anecdote, a real-life example that you could share with our viewers with regards to an organization that actually embarked upon that process towards more consciousness?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we've got an abundance of, I can't give you the names, but there's an abundance of companies that are getting stuck. So let me do the positive and the negative. I think there's an abundance of examples where leaders just pushing harder, getting everyone to work harder, isn't working, which gets them to entrench in macho, ego, action for the sake of action, fragmenting, polarizing. This for me is a scary norm that I'm seeing in times of crisis and stress. And actually it creates the opposite of peak performance. It kills performance, even though you're trying to push for performance. I think the biggest area I'm seeing, and I'm seeing this in 4 or 5 really interesting, massive global organizations at the moment, is when they're working on big complex issues, they're changing the way they organize away from kind of pyramids of steering groups where you've got 50 or 60 teams working on different parts of a problem, and it's the problem's broken down into bits, and everyone kind of puts issues up to the steering groups. It's too slow, it's not emergent, and I'm seeing a massive movement in this area around moving to ecosystem forms, which requires leaders to be able to hold bigger patterns, to work in community, to work at intersection. And I'm seeing this is the only way to deal with big complex problems. And this is a different way of organizing, a different way of leading. It's happening now. I'm seeing it in China. I'm seeing it in Germany. I'm seeing it in Latin America. It's a different way of organizing yourself around communities of teams, brain trusts, core teams. It's a very exciting time, but it's only just beginning to happen.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll leave this on a positive note that change is possible. There's obviously a lot of pressure happening and being exercised in organizations all over the world. But what I'm hearing you say is very clearly that yes, it takes effort, but it's doable. Thank you, Nick, for sharing your thoughts. It's a pleasure to know you, and again, I'm amazed by the work that you do. Thank you for taking the time, and I wish you a great future.
Thank you very much. Great stuff.